today. We're going to finish up our unit on dividing decimals with lesson 6-8, continue to divide with decimals. We're actually going to begin on page 343. If you don't already have it, grab your textbook and a couple sheets of graph paper and a pencil. All right. Our guiding question today is, how does annexing zeros to the dividend help you divide decimals? So let's look at this concept in context. How much protein is in 1 liter of orange juice? And we're told that we need to divide 9 1200ths by 1 5/10. That's because we have 9 12/10 grams of protein in this 1.5 liter bottle of juice. All right, our little 5th grade helper reminds us that sometimes you need to annex zeros to the dividend so that you can keep dividing. And if you remember, in 5th grade, we typically divide and we can stop when we get a decimal number out to the thousandths place, because we usually simply round our answers in 5th grade to the nearest hundredth if they keep on going. All right, so let's take a look at this. Step 1, they're asking you to estimate the quotient, and they're using a little bit of multiplication and number sense here to help you get this. A lot of you will look at it as if we're dividing 9 1200ths by 1 5/10. We already know that we're going to move the decimal to make the whole number out of the divisor. That would happen. So if we moved that decimal over also one place in the dividend to reflect the same movement, the same balance, then we'd get 91 2/10. Guys, we all know that 90 is a multiple of 15. So if we do that, then we're going to get a quick estimate of about 6 grams of protein. All right. So let's look at step 2. Step 2, we're going to multiply the divisor and the dividend by the same power of 10 to make the divisor a whole number. So as we've worked through topic 6, what you see is that the divisor is what we're looking at first. We make it a whole number by multiplying it by a power of 10, which basically means we move that decimal point to the right until it is out of the divisor, and then we do the same thing to the dividend, okay? And don't forget that we have to place the decimal point in the quotient, and you've heard me over and over say, pop up the decimal point. So what they did is they moved the decimal point one place to the right in the divisor, which means they multiplied by 10 or by 10 to the first power. They did the same thing in the dividend. That puts the decimal point behind 91. We pop it up. And if you remember to use that caret, dividing 15 into 91 is the only thing we can do to start with, because 15 won't divide into 9. So that tells us that in our answer, the digit behind a decimal point would be the ones place. So that tells me my answer is going to be 6 and something, okay? Now, the division is what takes place here. Let's just kind of look through it. We're dividing 15 into 91 6 times. 6 times 15 is 90. They subtract. They brought down the 2, okay? Now, 15 will not go into 12, so you have to put a 0 on your quotient bar. 0 times 15, 0. Of course, you get 12 when you subtract. This is where they're talking about annexing that 0 so you can keep on dividing. So we've talked about this before. 20 hundredths is the same as 2/10. That's an equivalent decimal. That's why we can do this. Now, by annexing that 0 and bringing it down, we're able to divide 15 into 120. It goes 8 times evenly. 8 times 15 is 120. Okay? Our answer for our estimate was 6. So our quotient of 6 8/100 is a reasonable answer. All right. So let's go and start working on some problems. I'm going to use graph paper, and I'm going to work the do you know how problems with you as our guided practice. So if you will get your paper out, go ahead and label it. Make sure you put that we're on page 345. My bad. That's where these problems come from if you need to come back and look at them. And the first problem we're going to work is problem number 2. Okay? So the problem is 1 1/8, and we're going to divide it into 72 hundredths. All right, so everybody, let's first of all get a little bit of an estimate. So I am looking at 72 hundredths divided by 1/8. All right, that to me, I'm thinking of this as 18. So I'm moving the decimal place one place to the right. So I'm dividing 7 by 18. Guys, I don't even know what that is, but I know one thing. My answer is going to be less than 1 whole. Would you agree? If you have 7 of something and you're dividing it into 18 equal parts, then my answer is going to be less than 1 whole. All right, so now we're ready to do the work. So I'm going to take a separate color just so that maybe you can see this a little better. If I move my decimal out of the divisor, I'm multiplying it by 10 to the first power. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And I get 7 2/10. I'm going to pop up the decimal point. Okay, go straight up. That's why graph paper works so well. All right, 18 is my divisor. It does not divide into 0 or 7. It's only going to divide into the 2. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put a 0 here because we know that in decimal numbers, if there is a 0 in the whole number slot, we need to put it there. All right. 18 goes into 72. I'm going to guess about 4 times because I know 16 or 15 times 4 is going to give me 60. So I'm going to try 4. All right. If I want to go out to the side and look at it, just using scratch area of my paper, 18 times 4, I can always do this. 4 times 8 is 32. 4 times 1 is 4 plus the 3 is 7. Bingo. 4 times 18 is 72. Get 0. So my answer is 4/10. That answer is certainly reasonable with an estimate of being less than 1 whole. All right, let's try another one. Number 3, we're going to divide 4 14 hundredths by 45 hundredths. All right, first thing I need to do is get an estimate. So when I look at this, I have 4 14 hundredths being divided by 45 hundredths. I know that 45, I'm going to move that decimal out 2 places. That's going to be about 50. I'm going to move that decimal out. So a number very close to 414 that's divisible by 50. I'm just going to go with 400. When I divide, the zeros cancel out. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So I have an estimate of close to 8. Okay, that's my estimate. Now, let's go over and let's take a peek. I'm going to move the decimal point out of my divisor by multiplying it times 10 to the second power, or 100. I'm going to do the same thing in the dividend. And when I move it, I'm going to pop that decimal point straight up into the divisor, into the quotient. All right, so I have 414 divided by 45, basically. I know 45 does not divide into 4. It does not even divide into 41. I am going to have to go into the whole number, okay? So we were thinking from the estimate that it's going to go 8 times. All right, let's try that. 45 times 8, just out to the side. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 4 is 32. So I get 36. So I get 360. But guys, when I subtract 360 from 414, that's going to be more than 45. So that means my quotient will not be 8. I need to give it a try with 9. And I know that because 400 subtracting 360 gives me 40. So using number sense, I know that's not going to work. All right, that's why I adjusted that 9. So then I'm just going to come over here and do 45 times 9. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 4 is 36. Plus that 4 gives me 400. All right, one small thing. You could multiply like I showed you in class, kind of using this as your multiplication board. Look what happens. 9 times 5 is 45. Regroup the 4. 9 times 4 is 36, plus the 4 is 40. 9 times 0 is 0, plus the 4. A lot of you understood that in class, so you may not have to do so much scratch work if you just work over to the side. All right, we do have to subtract. I'm just going to count up from 405 to 414. I'm going to get 9. All right. And then I do know that 45 will not divide, or sorry, I get 9. Don't I need to annex a 0 so I can keep dividing and bring it down? All right. So 45 doubled is 90. So 45 times 2 is 90. 2 times 45. There we go. So I get an answer of 9 2/10. Is that relatively close to my estimate of 8? Absolutely. So I should feel good about that. All right, let's try another one. I'm going to get 2 more under our belt, and then I'm going to give you a couple to try on your own before you're ready to work on your practice buddy. So number 4, we have 5 6/10, and we're going to divide it by 1400. So this one is written in our book as a number sentence, okay? So don't forget, we're going to need to use the divisor to make the whole number. So actually 14 would be our divisor. We'd move that decimal 2 places to the right. So we're really dividing 560 by 14. Okay, so I'm going to actually use compatible number 15 and 60 or 600 as my compatible number. All right, 15 goes into 60 4 times, so my estimate is about 40. Okay, since 15 goes into 64 times, it goes into 640. I maybe didn't explain that very well. All right, let's set it up to divide. So we have 1400s as our divisor. Our dividend is 5 6/10. In order to make the divisor a whole number, we already know we're going to multiply it times 100 or 10 to the second power. Look what happens. We need to do the same thing to our dividend. So that means we need to annex a 0. The decimal point would go behind it then, and we pop it straight up into our quotient. Now, I know that 14 does not divide into 5. It divides into 56. So if I put my little caret here, then with the decimal here, the caret here, I know I'm going to have a 2-digit answer in the tens place with or without a decimal behind it. All right. I know that 15 times 4 is 60. So let's see if 14 times 4 brings us close to 46. That would be a good place to begin. 4 times 4 is 16. Regroup the 1. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 1 is 5. Perfect. But I'm not done. I still have to bring down the 0, and I still have to divide. I have to follow through on those steps. So 14 goes into 0 times. 0 times 14 is 0. When I subtract and don't have anything to bring down, I'm done. So I get an answer of, or a quotient of 40, which makes sense if my estimate was 40. All right, and the last guided practice we're going to do is number 5. And we have 76 hundredths, and we're dividing it by 25 hundredths. All right, so when I drop down, the divisor would be a whole number 25. I'd be moving that decimal point 2 places to the right by multiplying it times 100. I'm going to do the same thing to 76 hundredths, but I'm going to make it 75, that set of compatible numbers, because I know that 75 divided by 25 is 3. I'm thinking about if I had 3 quarters in my pocket, that would be 75 cents. If I divide it by 25, I have 3 quarters. If that will help you with your estimate, 3 is our estimate. So now we're going to do the actual division. 25 hundredths is the divisor. We're dividing it into 76 hundredths. And we just talked about what's going to happen here. We're going to be moving the decimal 2 places to the right by multiplying 25 hundredths times 100. We're going to do the same thing to our dividend, and that decimal goes straight up when we're done. All right. I know that 25 is not going to go into 0 or 7. It's going to go into 76. Again, what we learned about whole number division is that tells us that that number is going to start in the ones place. Our quotient starts in the ones place, okay? I might or I might not have any decimal numbers behind it. Let's see what happens. 25 3 times is 75, so we can go ahead and put our 3 here. Okay, when we subtract, we get 1. So that means I'm going to have to annex a 0 so I can keep dividing. So I'm going to annex that 0. It does not change the value. Remember, we moved that decimal here. So if I put a 0 behind 76, 76 decimal 0 is equivalent to the whole number 76. All right, I'm going to bring down that 0. Now, in this case, 25 will not divide into 10. It goes 0 times. So I have 0 tenths here. 0 times 25 is 0. So boys and girls, what that means is I'm actually going to need to annex another 0 and bring it down. Still not changing the value of that dividend. I still have 76. I'm just using some zeros so I can keep the division going. All right, 25 goes into 100 4 times. 4 times 25 is 100. Now I'm done. I don't have a remainder. I don't have to keep dividing. I get 3 4/100, which makes sense because it is relatively close to 3. All right, we're going to work some of the independent practice problems, numbers 6 through 14. You can work a couple of them, pause your video, and then see how you're doing. All right, so I'm going to work the first 3, 6, 7, and 8. I'm going to then ask you to check how you did with those. If you got them all right and you've understood this concept, you're ready to stop and go work on your practice buddy for lesson 6-8. Don't forget, if you get stuck, you do have that get question help button that you can use. And don't forget that if you miss a problem, you should probably read what the computer tells you you've done wrong and then fix the problem. If you are not getting the next 3 problems correct, you might want to try a couple more with me before you move on to your practice buddy. All right, so go ahead and pause your computer. All right, let's take a look at numbers 6 through 8. Number 6, we were dividing 2 8/100 by 32/100. When I set it up to estimate, I actually moved the decimal point out of the divisor, moved it out of the dividend as well, because when I multiplied both times 100, that's what happens. I'm looking at 32. I round it to 30. A number very close to 20 that's divisible by 3 is 21. So I can use the compatible numbers 210 divided by 30 to get a quick estimate of 7. I did try 7 as my beginning number. That was too big, which is why my number starts with 6. Again, I knew that to get the decimal point out of the divisor, I multiplied it times 10 to the second power. I do the same thing with the dividend and pop it up. So that is why the decimal is in the right behind the ones place. So 6 times 32 gave me 192. I subtracted and I got 16. I need to keep dividing till my problem ends. So I'm able to annex the 0 behind where I moved the decimal point, not changing the value. So when I divided 32 into 160, it went 5 times even. When I subtract, I get a 0. I'm done. If I would not have had a 0, I would have had to annex another 0 in the dividend, brought it down, and kept that division going. All right, 6 5/10 is relatively close to my estimate of 7, so I feel good about that. Number 7, we're dividing 3 100 by 43/100. What I did over here was I don't know, I think I shortcutted it here. This 43/100, I moved the decimal point out, and actually I should have made this 40. I made a bad mistake there. All right. And I would have had 301, a number close to 301 that is divisible by 4 or 40. Excuse my mistakes there. And my estimating would have been 280. 280 divided by 4 would have given me an estimate of 7. I started out trying with 7 and it fit perfectly. 7 times 43 was 301. So 7 decimal is very clearly 7 as a whole number. All right, number 8. I'm dividing 6 51/100 by 6 2/10. With my estimate, when I move the decimal out, I'm dividing 62 into 65 1/10. A number very close to 65 that's divisible by 62 is 62. So I use the compatible numbers, 62 divided by 62. My estimate's going to be 1. That's a little bit of an underestimate, so I know my answer is going to be slightly over 1 whole. So again, when I go to divide, I multiply the dividend and the divisor by 10 to the first power, or by 10. I move it one place to the right, pop it up. 62 divides into 65 one time. When I multiply and subtract, I get 3. I bring down the 1. I know 62 goes into 31 no times. 0 times 62, 0. This is where I have this 31 remainder. You can't have a remainder when you have a decimal quotient. So that's why I annexed that 0, brought it down. 62 divided into 310 exactly 5 times. 5 times 62 was 310. No remainder, so my answer 1 5/10 is reasonable. It's a little more than my estimate of 1 whole, which it should be. All right, so boys and girls, if you did really well with 6, 7, and 8, you're ready to stop the video and go work on your practice buddy. If you did not do so well, go ahead, pause your button on your whatever device you're using, and go ahead and work problems 9, 10, and 11 on page 345, and then come back and look at it with me. All right, number 9, we're dividing 35 by 5/10. So when I go to get my estimate, I make this whole number 5. I'm going to multiply 35 times 10 to the first power and get 350. So 350 divided by 5, I get a quick estimate of 70. Guys, that is the answer. All right, it actually is the answer. And you can see we had to multiply the divisor and the dividend times 10, move that decimal one place to the right and annex a 0. When we divide, we get 70. Number 10, we're dividing 102 3/10 by 4 4/10. When I multiply the two numbers, the divisor by 10 to the first power and the dividend, I get 1,023 divided by 44. I'm going to use the compatible numbers 40 and 1,200 to get a quick estimate of 30. When I went over, I multiplied the divisor by 10 to the first power. When I did that with the dividend, I moved the decimal one place to the right, pop it up. I'm working on my division. My first number of 3 was too high. I had to adjust my quotient to start with 2. Here I go. 2 times 44 was 88. I get 14 as my difference. When I subtract, I bring down the 3. 44 went into 143 3 times. 3 times 44 was 132. I subtracted. I can't have this remainder of 11, which is why I had to annex and bring down a 0. 44 went into 110 2 times. 2 times 44 was 88. Again, I get a difference of 22. I can't have a remainder. I had to annex another 0 and bring it down. And I'm going to now divide 44 into 220. It does go 5 times even. 5 times 44 is 220. I'm done. No remainder. 23 and 25/100 is relatively close to my estimate of 30, so I feel good about that. Number 11, 9 3/10 divided by 31/100. I look at that divisor. I make it a whole number by multiplying it times 100. I do the same thing with the with the dividend. So when I move that decimal 2 places to the right, it actually becomes 930. I'm going to use the compatible numbers 30 and 930 to get a quick estimate of 31. When I set up my problem, I take the divisor, multiply it times 10 to the second power. I do the same thing with the dividend, which makes me have to annex a 0, and then I pop up the decimal point. 31 goes into 93 3 times. 3 times 31 is 93. Awesome. I subtract, I get a 0. But boys and girls, I have to keep going because I have to bring down that annex 0. So then I divide 31 into 0, which is 0. 0 times 31 is 0. I'm done here. There's no remainder. There is nothing else to bring down. 30 decimal is just another way we write the whole number 30. My estimate and my actual quotient are very close, so I should feel good about it. If you feel like you now have this concept and you're ready to practice on your own, you can go to your practice buddy. Otherwise, pause your video and let's do numbers 12 to 14 together. All right, boys and girls, our last 3 problems. Number 12, we're dividing 25 and 44 hundredths by 6 hundredths. To get my estimate, I'm going to look at that divisor. I'm going to multiply it times 100 to make it the whole number 6. I'm going to do the same thing with my dividend. So I'm looking at 2,544 divided by 6. I'm going to use those compatible numbers, 2,400 divided by 6, to get a quick estimate of 400. Then when I go over and do my actual division to get the decimal point out of the divisor, I multiply it times 100. I do the same thing with the dividend, pop that decimal point straight up. When I divide, I get 424 decimal, which is 424. I did not have to annex any zeros in this particular problem. Number 13, I did. Let's take a look at number 13. 90 divided by 45 hundredths. Again, to get my quick estimate, I'm going to have to move the decimal 2 places to the right to get it out of the divisor. When I do it with the dividend, I'm actually mentally annexing that decimal point, moving it 2 places to the right. So 90 becomes 9,000. When I look at this, I get a quick estimate, which actually is the answer of 200. 9,000 divided by 45 is 200. If I want to practice it with the algorithm, I am annexing zeros. So you can see what happens here. 45 times 100 moves the decimal out. 90 times 100 makes me have to annex 2 zeros to move the decimal behind it and pop it up. 45 goes into 90 2 times. 2 times 45 is 90. I do subtract and get a 0, but I have to bring down these annex zeros one at a time. 45 goes into 0 0 times. 0 times 45 is 0. I subtract and get 0, but I have this last annex 0 that needs to come down and be divided into. 45 goes into that 0, 0 times. 0 times 45 is 0. I am done right there. And there it is for 200, same as my estimate. Number 14, I am looking at dividing 3 and 24 hundredths by 48 hundredths. In order to move the decimal point out of the divisor, I move it 2 places to the right by multiplying 48 hundredths times 10 to the second power. When I do that with the dividend, I get 324 divided by 48. I'm going to round 48 to 50, use the compatible numbers 300 divided by 50 to get a quick estimate of 60. Now, I set up my problem to divide. I multiply my divisor by 10 to the second power. When I do the same thing with my dividend, the decimal goes behind 324 and I pop up the decimal point. Using my estimate, I tried to see if 48 would go into 324 6 times. It did. 6 times 48 was 288. When I subtracted, I got 36. But I do have to annex a 0 and bring it down because I've got to keep dividing. 48 goes into 360 7 times. 7 times 48 is 336. When I subtract, I get 24. But I still need to keep dividing. I can't have a remainder. So I annex another 0, bring it down. 48 goes into 240 5 times. 5 times 48 is 240. I'm done. I don't have a remainder. If I did, I'd have to annex another 0 and keep dividing. So when I look at my answer, 6 and 75 hundredths, it is nowhere close to 60. So I have made a mistake. So where is my mistake? It is over here. All right, so let's go back. I was dividing 3 and 24 hundredths by 48 hundredths. 48 hundredths became 48. This did become 324. This is my problem. When I canceled out my zeros, I was dividing 30 by 5, so my estimate should have been 6. So there it is, boys and girls. Even Miss Pacell, who's been doing 5th grade math for many, many years, tends to make careless mistakes. So when you make a mistake, don't just leave it. You know it's there. Look and see where it is. My mistake was in the estimate. Now when I compare, my estimate is very close to my actual quotient. So I can feel good about 6 7/500. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for you to try your practice problems. You should be at a point now where you're getting very good with this division with decimals. And you see today how annexing those zeros help you to continue to divide decimals. So good luck with your practice, buddy, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.